John Rood, thank you so much for joining me on AI6.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, introduce yourself and your company to the audience.
Well, sure. So my name is John Rood. I'm the founder of a company called Proceptual, and we do AI governance, implementation, and training.
Well, hey, you cannot have AI without governance, but how do you define AI governance?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a short answer and there's a longer answer. And the short answer is, if we're just looking for, the definition, AI governance is the process of making sure that the things that we as societies, as organizations, as companies, and as people do with AI aligns with our intention for what we're trying to accomplish, and I think aligns with the needs of the different stakeholders, right? So that would be, I think, the short answer. The longer answer really is that the work of AI governance is figuring out what are the processes and policies that take kind of that lofty goal of aligning AI with our needs and make it something that actually works in a company or an organization.
Yeah, and we're all governed by the various different types of AI legislation across the world. And as you know, I'm in Ireland, so we're governed by the EU AI Act, which is quite stringent. Let's face it, it's probably one of the strictest in the world. And from a European's perspective, and I attended Harvard during the summer on AI and public policy, and it became very evident that in the EU we have stricter regulations. So governance is very much in the mind of audiences over here. Would you say that, it's important to be a governance first thinker when you're introducing AI into your organization, or can it be an after the fact thought?
Well, again, I'm going to give you two answers. And so the short answer and the right answer, which I think is the one that you're getting at, is the sooner that you think about governance and put it into the organization, the better, and the easier that process is. Unfortunately, what we observe pretty frequently is that organizations don't think about this initially. And that, to me, comes down to this idea of risk management. So the risk management, simply put, is the idea that different organizations, whether they be companies, nonprofits, governments, individuals, have different tolerances for risk around the use of AI. And that really governs, I think, when they put in systems of governance. So, for example, we've worked with very large organizations in what the EU AI Act would define as high-risk industries, and their ability to accept risk is quite low. And sometimes we work with startups, and their ability to accept risk is substantially higher.
Yeah, so it really just depends maybe on the sector or the industry. So what does AI governance look like in practice? What are you doing with organizations to help them comply in the first instance, but also mitigate risk on a longer term?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, what we're doing when we work with an organization on governance is, first of all, we do what really is harder work than it sounds of figuring out kind of what we had just talked about, which is the organization's level of acceptable risk. Because again, what AI governance and AI policy looks like at a video game startup just looks radically different from what it has to look like in a $1 billion healthcare organization or education organization, for example. First of all, we'll define that risk. Secondly, we'll identify what the different frameworks and regulations that apply to that organization are. So, again, to your example, an organization which is governed by the EU AI Act, which is actually most of them, right? Because it's not only companies based in the EU, but it's organizations that sell into the EU. So we'll identify what are the regulatory frameworks, and then what are the voluntary or certification-based frameworks that might apply. So for that, we're looking at ISO 42001, which is a certifiable AI governance framework, and many people are familiar with ISO 27001, which is data security and privacy. Here in the U.S., we frequently use the National Institutes of Standards and Technology AI risk management framework. So long story short, we're identifying what are the regulations, what are the frameworks that get us to compliance with those regulations, and then again, it's the hard work of putting that kind of generalized framework into actual practice within a complicated organization full of different stakeholders, different actors, different personalities. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road and becomes even more complicated.
And as you're explaining it there, it really is bespoke to every organization. But again, going back to governance in practice, I'm thinking about things like, you can never blame the bot. Accountability must also always lie with an individual. You're also probably taking into consideration data, how you're storing data, how you're sharing data. Are you using publicly available models? Have you got your own secure server, your local model? So there's a lot technically. Are you working with leadership teams, IT teams, communications teams, or is it cross department?
It's all of the above. The challenge with AI governance is, it would be super easy if we said, here's just like the set of 10 things that you just can't do. So like, don't do those 10 things, right? But in practice, the reality is that there's not just, there's some things that you can't do, right? You can't expose, personal identifiable information on, a public database or whatever. But those are kind of I wouldn't say it's easy to do those things, but those are clear cut, like it's clear what to do. The challenge, again, it goes back to this idea of risk management, which is, in an organization, what the IT team or the team building the technology may want to do may differ sharply from what the information security team or the privacy team wants to do. And that may be different from what the marketing team wants to do. That may be different from what the board wants to do. So, to your great question, it's all of the above. And it's thinking through, how do we get this organization, which is full of complicated people doing complicated things, to ultimately agree on a set of practices which move the organization forward. And so I would say that's the human aspect of the work of AI governance.
And then we know the phenomenon of shadow AI is alive and well in all organizations, as curious employees, use ChatGPT to help them, get off a blank page or to prepare for an important meeting or client objections. How problematic is that when we think about AI governance?
So it's 2 weeks ago, I taught a 2-day seminar on AI governance, and shadow AI was one of the primary topics. And the challenge with shadow AI that we see, it's no longer is it, an organization bans AI and then the employees secretly use AI. Like that's what the issue was 2 years ago. Now organizations are more sophisticated than to just say like we're going to ban AI. Like that's not realistic anymore. But what we see is that an organization will do an AI deployment. Oftentimes this is Microsoft Copilot or it's ChatGPT Enterprise Edition. And then it'll go to the information security and privacy team. The information security and privacy team will lock it down so tightly that when the actual end user in the organization starts to use it, they realize, wait a second, this implementation of Microsoft Copilot is 10 times worse than the free version of ChatGPT that I just have on my phone. So the issue of shadow AI is when it becomes an even bigger issue when it's kind of this conflict between what an organization from a security standpoint or a privacy standpoint wants to do versus having a usable system, right? Like that's where the conflict comes into effect. And that's kind of where we see, there'll be an official implementation of whatever, and then people are just on their free ChatGPT on their phone doing the work.
That's a really interesting perspective and experience that you have. So who do you think is leading in your experience? Like who's calling for AI governance? Is it coming from a particular cohort in particular? Is it leadership? Is it IT? Like who's driving this?
What we see more often in our business than anything else, just who our customer base is, bizarrely, it comes from sales. And it comes from sales because particularly when we work with, I would say, small to mid-size organizations, whether it be a startup or, a couple hundred people, like mid-market company, they will go and they're going to try to sell an enterprise, right? So they're going to go and try to sell to a, multi-billion-dollar company. And since time immemorial, the large company sends the compliance check sheet to the smaller company, and that has things like, do you have SOC 2 or ISO 27001? Do you do all these things? And now at the top of that list is AI governance, right? So what we see is that becomes a blocker in organizations' sales efforts, and that's when it starts to get kicked up the chain. I wish I could say that this comes directly from CEOs and boards, and sometimes it does, especially at large organizations that have the resources to do projects like governance. But the reality is that this is becoming a market imperative, that if you're going to go sell into a sophisticated organization, they'll have a governance requirement, and then that's when we start to get phone calls.
That is fascinating. And where does policy play? Does policy come after you've done your AI governance due diligence, or are organizations writing policy and think that's their AI governance?
I think it's a complicated question. So I think that the best way to do this work is to start from what are the organizational needs, which again are consistently changing. Then how do those needs map onto regulations and frameworks? And then the regulations and frameworks that we choose end up as policies. It's possible to do it backwards, right? So it's not ideal, but sometimes we'll see that where oftentimes we'll get the call after an organization has tried to do this internally, right? Like they've gotten their required orders for AI governance from the large organization that they're selling into. And then they'll say okay, well, we just need to gin up some policies here. So they gin up some policies. The policies end up in a filing cabinet somewhere. No one pays attention to them, and that becomes a debacle, right? The worst thing is having a set of policies that are so restrictive or so unthoughtful, I would say, that parts of the organization start to route around it, right? If you have policies that the organization is routing around, that is a recipe for liability.
Yeah. And of course, the speed of AI and the evolution of the technology is such that what we might have started 6 months ago as a pilot, and we had all our governance frameworks covered, now has kind of multiplied into something that doesn't look anything like what we started with. So am I correct in thinking that governance is something that's maybe like a live document, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important in the world of risk management and the world of governance, this idea of continual improvement. And this exists in quality management systems going back decades in the in industrial factories and all sorts of organizations. In the context of AI governance, continual improvement means that there is a process in place for updating the governance documentation. Usually what that means functionally is that there is an executive in an organization who is responsible for what I would call the day-to-day work of AI governance. Oftentimes that's approvals, right? So that's the marketing team wants to use some new AI system that they saw at a conference. They need to get that approved quickly through the AI governance process, because again, what we're trying to avoid is this routing around problem. And if you tell the marketing team that it's going to take 6 months to approve this new application they want to do, they're going to find a way around it, right? So we have to have an ability for an executive to be in charge of quick approvals or disapprovals. Additionally, we have to make sure that on a quarterly basis, that would be at least our recommendations quarterly, that there's an AI governance committee, which is composed of leadership, executives, oftentimes investors or board members, that's responsible for updating sort of the governance system or the governance policies as a whole. So yes, to your point, this is work that never stops. I don't think it ever stops in terms of any technology, but especially with AI, this is going so rapidly that, an organization today that doesn't have a policy around, AI video avatars or deep fakes is far behind. And 18 months ago, those words didn't barely existed, right? So this does move quite quickly.
What role does AI literacy play in AI governance? And with that, are you expecting not just decision makers to be AI literate, but the rest of your team as well?
So AI literacy is, when I started to do this work, 3.5 years ago, that word kind of meant something that was well, we should maybe do some training about how to do prompting. And today I think that's evolved substantially. And one of the drivers of that evolution is that AI literacy as a concept is required by many of the frameworks and regulations that we talked about. So for example, in the EU AI Act, it's very specific that people that touch AI in the organization have to have the right level of training. So one of the things that we do is help organizations kind of outline what does that look like. Now, certainly that means that there's, the AI governance executive or whoever's kind of like the AI champion should have quite a high level of qualification, right? Like they should be, for example, ISO 27 or ISO 42001 lead implementer certified or something like that, right? Or they should have an advanced, academic degree. But there's also a set of AI literacy objectives that we need to make sure that that the executives have, right? That the board members have. That also filters all the way down in the organization, where frontline employees really need to know a little bit about AI safety and governance, right? Then they don't necessarily need to know like all of the details. They don't need to read the model card, but everyone in the organization needs really basic training on topics like, here's why we don't upload personally identifiable information into, into ChatGPT on our phone. And I cannot tell you how many calls we get on exactly that topic, particularly in healthcare organizations. Like I've gotten probably a dozen phone calls in the last year from healthcare organizations that come to us because someone somewhere in the healthcare organization started to upload personally identifiable information to some kind of AI to update their patient files more quickly. That's obviously a big problem. But again, like if we're not training people on why not to do that and what to do instead, we're not doing the hard work of making sure that, again, that 2-inch binder of governance documents actually reaches into the organization. That's a big challenge.
And what are the top AI skills that people are looking for from you right now?
So from us, people are looking for a couple things. The first is navigating the trade-offs that are just part of the AI governance work, and I think part of any governance work. And I think that those are people skills primarily. So, you could Google right now, or you could go to ChatGPT, even the free edition, and say, create me a set of AI governance documents for my, HR tech startup. And you'd have a set of documents and you just, sign them and be done, right? The challenge, of course, is that those documents don't mean anything or do anything, especially if no one's signed off on them throughout the organization. So the work of governance really is a work of kind of bringing the organization together around a shared set of principles. That's difficult work. That involves a lot of trade-offs. Functionally, it involves a lot of meetings. I think that we're able to get organizations through it quicker than they could themselves. And I think that that's the primary thing that people are looking for, like thorough governance documents that are organization approved, that also happen at the fastest speed possible, which, to be honest, is not so fast, but speed does count.
Now, just listening to you and having this conversation, it occurs to me that taking governance as a first step in terms of embedding AI into an organization is a really good approach, because it's hitting all levels, all departments, and it's building up a capability, but also a confidence that we can really use AI to our best advantage, because there's a lot of fear out there of people getting it wrong, even though they're using shadow AI.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I think one of the things that's not an official governance function, like you won't find it in any regulation, is building the cultural muscle around using AI. It's exactly what you had said. So that's about, number one, how do we embed a sense of experimentation or innovation in the organization, which is not easy. There was just a study conducted by MIT that said that 95% of AI implementations fail. Like, you're smiling, you've seen it. Like, everyone who's in the world of AI has seen this study, right? And so that creates a lot of interest in how you can avoid those fates. And what I read in the article was so interesting about it was it talks about how, a lot of organizations, the board will say, we have to do AI, right? And then the CEO will say, we have to do AI. And the CTO says, okay, I need to have an AI project with some metrics tied to it. So we're going to get Microsoft Copilot, Pro Edition for everyone. And if we have an 85% usage rate, we've succeeded, right? So then, like, people use it, they plan their dinners or whatever with it. We say, like, okay, check mark, like we did it. And then there's no value created whatsoever. What we see working much better is kind of the opposite, where instead of from the top down, it comes bottom up. And the way that we kind of are able to enable that bottom up is, number one, having the organizational muscle that we're going to experiment with AI systems, and sometimes we'll succeed and sometimes we'll fail, but we'll always learn. And number two, that we have an organizational methodology to capture those learnings and to turn them into future successes. And I think we're not there yet in most organizations, but that's what I hope that our clients at least are shooting for.
This is just such an insightful, and it's a thought-provoking conversation. And I really hope the people that are listening or indeed watching this on YouTube, it's really making them think about what they need to do or their next steps in their organizations. John, are you optimistic for AI for good? I mean, we're on the side of AI for good, right? And we need more people on that side. Are you optimistic that people are going into AI with the right mindset and the commitment? I know there's an investment here of time, of money, of people. Do you see that commitment coming through on your side?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. And what makes me optimistic is, I think 2 or 3 years ago, when we were first beginning to do this work in our organization, it was just kind of like the Wild West, and it wasn't clear. Companies were doing all sorts of crazy things. Regulators, like not only at the international level, but at like the municipal level, were passing all sorts of AI regulations, and just wasn't clear what was going to happen. And I think that the really good news is that now that sort of the entire community of AI governance and regulation is coalescing around this idea of what governance is, right? Governance is implementation of a recognized governance framework into your organization. I think that that's a big step forward. And so when I see, organizations call us and say, well, we're trying to sell into, Microsoft or Google or, Walmart or whoever, some big company. And they said, well, we've got to have, AI governance, a really good sign. So I think that these requirements are kind of filtering through all sizes and all levels of organizations. And I think that makes me pretty optimistic, even independent, honestly, of regulatory action, like particularly here in the US where I am, like it's a total mess. But even in the absence of that, it seems like people are getting the message and doing the right things.
What a wonderful conversation, John. Thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, where do you want to direct people to find out more about you and your company's work?
Sure. So I'm sure we'll have the links in the show notes, but people can go to our website at proceptual.com, or I'll leave my LinkedIn link in there as well. I'd love for people to connect with me and shoot me a note. Tell me what you're working on.
Brilliant. Well, listen, John Rood, thank you so much, and continued success with your AI offerings to your clients.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.